Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This episode is part 3 of a 3-part series where we're covering the step-by-step actions you want to take during the interview and hiring process. Now, normally, if I'm doing a multi-episode series, I'd say, just go back and listen to the other ones. But if you're like me, keep going, and you can listen to the other ones later, right? Just as you can tell, I have problems with authority. In this case, I wouldn't do that. If you have missed parts 1 and 2, I would. They're the episodes that just precede this one. Listen to those, because where we're picking up this week is we've gone over all the points we want to do during our interview, and now we're just going to be taking a look at some of the final checks you're going to want to do before you hire somebody. We're going to look at additional questions we're going to want to ask technical staff, providers, doctors and hygienists and dental assistants. And then we're going to go over how we're taking everything we've covered in these episodes and you put it together all in one package for the interview process for implementation. So please, if you have a chance, listen to parts 1 and 2. They're very important to the full understanding of this subject. And as always, here's my disclaimer. I am not an employment attorney, and employment law varies wildly state to state in the U.S. And if you're outside the U.S., there's even more things to consider. So definitely when hiring or dealing with personnel, I'd recommend having a good employment attorney you can talk to. And nothing I say can constitute or will constitute rather legal advice. And we, of course, expect that you'd rely on the appropriate advisor to ensure you stay within the letter of the law in your municipality. Wow, that was a lot to say in one shot. But anyway, all right, so let's just jump into this. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And just to start off, you probably remember this if you listened to the last episode, there are 4 big picture boxes I'm looking to check with an applicant prior to hiring them. And those boxes, I'm just going to reiterate them, were 1, the applicant's emotional tone level, which I explained in episode 1, along with providing an easy technique to gain insight into this. Point 2 is the applicant's ability to produce, like potential to be a productive employee, as shown by prior jobs, which I covered in last week's episode 2. Number 3 was determining if the applicant is qualified for the position. If they're a provider, are they licensed? Do they actually want it? Are there no major red flags? I got into that in episode 2. I'll get a little bit more into it in this week, episode 3 this week. And then point 4 is that there are no major barriers to them doing the position. The position is Monday through Friday, but they can't work Mondays. That's a problem. Or the position requires travel and they can't travel. That's a problem. So those are the 4 big boxes. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of other points. A lot of it I got into last week. So where we left off last week was we have somebody who has checked all of our boxes, or at least has appeared to check all of our boxes to the point where we're serious about hiring this person now. No red flags, etc. Well, what do we do next? Well, there's a couple things. 1, if they're a technical staff member, meaning a doctor or hygienist assistant, there may be a few additional questions we're going to want to ask. And if they are going to be handling finance or other specific areas where they're going to be writing a lot of letters, there's a couple other things we might want to do. Now, let's assume, I'm going to get into that later in the episode. I know it's a little bit out of sequence, but this just flows a little bit better. Let's just say, okay, we really want to hire this person. This person looks great on paper. This person interviewed well. They seem like they'd be a good fit for the job. What's our usual next step? Well, normally we'd now want to check references. And I've seen checking references seems to be something that I've seen people, I'm generalizing here. But over the course of my career, I've seen periods where everybody I talk to checks references and other times when nobody checks references. I always check references. And there's a couple of reasons for this, right? And there's a reason why people stop checking references. But the reasons I check references is to make sure that the person is who they say they are. And also, if I've gotten into what this person produced on their prior jobs, there's a good chance I could verify some of that. It's not always going to happen, but there's a good chance that I can. The problem with checking references is, you call and you go, hi, I'm calling about Jane and she worked for you. Could you tell me a little bit about her performance? And then some people will just give you the dates they were employed and whether they would rehire them or not. And then some people get a bit too much into stuff. Well, I really shouldn't be saying this. And none of these are useful in the big picture, okay? None of these are useful. And I think the reason why people have become a bit gun shy is they're worried about being sued. And to that end, I saw this years back, I saw this start to get outsourced, especially if somebody had worked for a bigger company, people were outsourcing their references. So, you'd call, they worked for XYZ company, and then the company you're calling for a reference is just some company that has the records of their employees. So they really couldn't tell you anything anyway. So let's talk about checking references here. The first thing I'm going to do when I check references, because normally people will leave like 3 names at their prior jobs. The first thing I'm going to do is they may have like, here's Gus Jones. Gus was my supervisor, and here's Gus's phone number. I'm not going to call Gus's phone number. What I'm going to do is look at the name of the company they worked for. It was ABC Manufacturing. I'm going to go online, find the phone number for ABC Manufacturing, and I'm going to call ABC Manufacturing and ask for Gus Jones. You might go, why am I doing this? You probably have already figured this out, because I have seen cases where someone will list Gus Jones, my supervisor, and Gus is just their buddy who they've instructed to give them a good reference. I've seen that happen a lot. So that's the first thing. If I call, can I speak to Gus Jones? And there's no Gus Jones. There's never been a Gus Jones. It's just a made-up person. And I see a pattern of this. Well, this person's lying. My applicant is lying. That's a real problem for me. And I've seen this turn really bad in certain cases where someone was really misrepresenting who they actually were. But let's say I called, ABC Manufacturing, and Gus comes on the phone, and now I'm asking Gus about Jane Smith, the person who's interviewing with me. Well, when I was interviewing Jane, I verified to some degree, I got an idea if Jane had a record of producing at prior jobs. I asked Jane what her job was, what her responsibilities were, what was she responsible for producing, and in what volume. So let's say Jane was in charge of purchasing, and one of the things she pointed out when I interviewed her was that she was able to save the company 20% on most of what they were purchasing because she was very astute about finding good deals. Well, I could ask Gus this. So one thing Jane said, she was your purchaser. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. And she said she worked from this date to this date. Yes. And of course, I could ask if he'd hire Jane, but that, okay, fine, right? Maybe Gus has lower standards than I do. It really doesn't matter, right? To me, I'm going to ask then, well, Jane said she was in charge of purchasing, and she said that she actually lowered your guys' costs by about 20% on most of the major items you guys were purchasing. Now, what if Gus says, oh, yeah, Jane was great. We were so sorry that she moved. And yeah, she actually lowered our costs more like 25%. Jane's just being modest. That's a glowing reference, and that's really good. That sort of verifies what Jane was talking about, okay? That's a good thing. Now, let's say he says, no, actually, we were spending so much money when Jane was the purchaser, so, that was one of the reasons we thought it would be better to go a different direction and move her to this other department. Okay, well, that's a problem. Do you see? So that's why references have some degree of weight. Number one, I'm going to make sure I'm calling the actual company, not one of their buddies. And number two, I'm going to attempt to verify the products that they claimed to have obtained on that job or the level of production they claimed. If it was a prior financial coordinator for another dental practice and they told me they collected 97% and were collecting about $1.5 million a year, I can just ask that question straight up to the office manager. So, Susie here said she was your financial coordinator. Yes. And she worked for you from this date to this date. Yes. Now, Susie said she averaged about a 97% collection rate and doing about, collecting about $1.5 million a year. Is that correct? Oh, yeah. Susie was great. She was probably 97, 98%, and that's about what we collect. Fine. That's a good verification. Now, the other wrinkle I would add with this is because of the way the labor market, it's been very wonky the last 4 or 5 years, you've probably seen it, is if I have somebody that I really want to hire and they're going to be interviewing elsewhere, I want to check those references right now. I might even ask them to just wait a sec. Hey, do you mind hanging out for just a second while I check these references? Because I want to make a hiring decision as quickly as possible. Okay, I want to just make a decision, get off the dime. If the references come through okay, I want to offer them or extend an offer of employment. Now, the last point on this, what if, I don't know what your job application looks like, but, we have one that was put together by our employment attorney, and I would definitely recommend that any application that you use has eyes put on it by your employment attorney to make sure it's correct. And one of the things I've found over the years is a lot of things I thought I could ask, I can't. And a lot of things I didn't think I could ask, I can. So this is why it's a good idea. And you might even ask your employment attorney, hey, are there like 10 or 12 things that I'm not allowed to ask a prospective employee, and they can kind of give you this list, and some of those might surprise you. Anyway, but what if they have on this application, these are their employment, or the people their employers. I can't believe I couldn't remember that name for a second or a word, and they don't want me to call their current employer for a reference. Is that a deal breaker? I'm going to say it depends. Most likely no, because if the person's looking for another job and they don't want me to call their employer, I might ask why. And if they say, well, I haven't really told them that I'm looking, I would like to tell them first. Well, then fine. right? I can deal with that. I understand how life works, and that's okay. That being said, would I want one of my employees looking for other work without telling me they're looking for other work? Of course not. Does it happen? Sure, it's happened to me before, and I didn't really like it very much. But you can't always get what you want, right? I'm going to try and understand the circumstance a little bit. Well, are you planning on talking to your employer? You know, what's your thought process here? This is really more of a personal decision on your part. I like to think of the golden rule in this sense, you know? I'm going to try and handle it the way I would want to be handled. So this is more of a personal decision on your part, and it's more circumstantial. I was very surprised once where I asked a prospective employee why I couldn't call her current employer, and the answer shocked me a bit. So I get to this point, and I ask her, can I call your current employer? And she said, no, because he doesn't know that I'm looking yet. Which again, I said, okay, I understand. I understand where people are coming from in that regard, depending, I don't know what her circumstances are. But then she volunteers why she hasn't told her employer yet is because, he just spent a bunch of money on this big training program for me. And part of the agreement I had to make is if he was going to spend this money, I had to agree to work for him for at least 2 years. Otherwise, I was going to have to pay the money back that he gave me or that he used or paid on my behalf for this training, because obviously this training was going to advance her career, so therefore she agreed to work for there at least 2 years, which, complete digression here, I'm a fan of that. If you're going to invest big bucks in training somebody, I think that they should have some skin in the game. Otherwise, you're just throwing money away. Obviously you'd have to check how this works where you are in your state. We do that. Where if we're going to make a large investment into somebody, then obviously that parlays into other career advancements. If they were to leave here, they have to agree to work for us for a certain length of time, and we can't just arbitrarily fire them, which why would I do that anyway if they're more trained and more competent? But you get the idea, right? So she had signed a contract with this guy, essentially, and she didn't want to tell him that she was looking, and meanwhile she was working with a lawyer to figure out how she could get out of that contract. And to me, that was a little bit disingenuous because, to top it off, throughout the interview, she told me how honest she was. She's the most honest person she knows, and all her friends will say how honest and ethical she is, and then meanwhile she's doing this. Anyway, and she'd worked with this fella for a long enough time to know his track record and whether it was worth working for him or if he was a problem. It's not like he changed all of a sudden. So she knew exactly what she was getting into. So that was an issue for me because I didn't want that played out with me because I will invest money into training employees as well. And this is just something you can think with, which I could do a whole other episode on this, but training is a reward. Training is not something – you obviously have to train people for their jobs, okay? But if you were to fund a large training program for one of your employees, let's say you sent an associate doctor to a $30,000 or $40,000 CE course, well, I would expect them to be there a while, and I would want some agreement that, hey, if I'm going to invest this in you, you're going to be around for a while. Otherwise, they could leave next month and you're out, and with the way things are, no competes and things like this are going these days, I would want to protect myself in that regard, at least financially. Otherwise, I don't think it's fair. The only one with the skin in the game is you. So this is something you can discuss with your employment attorney, but it also tells you that before you invest big bucks in training somebody, make sure they're worth it, and how do you know they're worth it? They have a record of being productive, and they're an up-and-coming employee. I'm not talking about basic training. We have our online training, DDS Success. It's video training they can do in the office, okay? That's not a humongous investment. It's whatever their hourly rate is because you get a certain amount of people with your subscription. Okay, I'll put a link to that on the episode webpage if you want to know more about it. But if you're going to spend money to fly them somewhere and pay for a course and this and that and whatever, I would definitely want to know that this person's going to be around for a little while. Otherwise, I'm out that money. And this is sort of where training gets a bit of a bad name in that somebody spends a lot of money on training somebody and they just leave, which that's always a risk. You're always going to have that risk, but I wouldn't use that risk to make me refrain from training people. Instead, I would protect myself and them if I'm going to make a large investment in their training. That's what I recommend clients do the same thing if they're doing like an office manager, training an office manager here at MGE. That's 600 hours of training, 78 days. That's salaries and travel and food and hotels, as well as the tens of thousands of dollars it costs to actually invest in the training. I wouldn't just flippantly give that out. I would make sure that the person, A, rates it from a productivity perspective, and B, that they're planning on being there a while. At least I want them to be there a while, and they plan on being there a while. So anyway, that's the deal with references, okay? You want to make sure they are who they say they are. You want to do it quickly, hopefully while they wait. And you want to also potentially, if possible, verify productivity. Now, what are some other things that I'd recommend you check with an employee? And again, this is where you're going to want an employment attorney to navigate you through this. But if we want to make sure that we're really doing our due diligence, because an employee, again, people are not houses or cars or, equipment or office buildings, but people do require an investment. So if I'm going to invest time and energy and money into a person and let them loose on my patient base, I'm going to want to make sure I'm making the correct decision within reason, okay? The next thing that I do when I'm hiring, and I recommend that our clients do, is I do a background check on the prospective employee. Now, to be clear about this, you want to do a properly sanctioned background check for employment purposes. So what that means is you're not using one of these background services that you see advertised like Been Verified or People Finder. As a matter of fact, those sites have a warning. You can't use this for making a rental decision or an employment decision. There's a reason. When we do a background check, the person consents to it and signs a document indicating that they are consenting to a background check. We used to use a company for this called S2 Verify. S2 Verify. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. We haven't used them for a while. We now use ADP, which, the payroll service. That's one of the services we get from them. It costs us maybe, $35 to do a background check. It turns around relatively fast. I don't know that it would do it while they're waiting, so that's something you're going to have to find out. As far as what circumstances have to be in place in order for you to get a background check, this is something you're going to want to talk to an employment lawyer about. For instance, and this does not constitute legal advice, folks, but I'm spending $35, so obviously I want to make sure that I'm interested in really hiring this person. If I have zero interest, why would I spend the money? Number one. So if I really want to hire them, I'm doing the background check. It's not a lot of money, $35, but it's still money. So they sign something agreeing that I can do the background check. Some come back pretty quick, some don't. Really depends on what's going on and where they're from. If they're from a state where it's tough to get those records, that might be a problem. And in certain states, it differs as to when you can actually do one. So for instance, and again, this does not constitute legal advice, okay? In Florida, if we're interested in hiring somebody, we just have them sign the thing, we do the background check. In California, and again, I could be getting this wrong, folks, but the last I'd heard on the grapevine was that we have to actually offer the position pending the background check. So in other words, I would have to say to you, yes, we want to hire you pending a background check. Therefore, I need to do a background check and have you sign something. Then I do the background check. So why am I doing a background check? I want to make sure, because are certain things going to, what if they had a DUI 11 years ago? I probably don't care. Do they drive now? Yeah, great. They're going to be around in a dental practice. They're going to, if they have a drug problem, they're going to be around prescription pads and the ability to prescribe. So obviously I don't want to deal with that. But also, maybe I'm funny. I don't consider the fact that a person got in trouble at one point in their life to be a complete red flag that I don't ever want to deal with. But if there's a pattern of it, it's a problem. Like if on their background check it comes up that they just spent a month in jail for assault last month, that might be a problem for me. Just saying, or embezzlement from their last employer, or you see, these are the things that are going to come up on the background check. So this is why I do it. You want to make sure that you're doing it in accordance to whatever your state laws are when you're doing it. You're not using one of these, dating background checks that they advertise, Been Verified. You're using a proper one through a company who does employee background checks. All right. Next thing is if I'm hiring somebody that's going to be dealing with money, their financial coordinator, treatment coordinator, office manager, bookkeeper, etc., I'm also doing a credit, or even an executive position, I'm doing a credit check. You might go, well, why are you doing a credit check? Well, to me, again, it's a point of patterns, okay? If I have somebody who is completely irresponsible with money, they have a 411 credit score. I don't know if that really exists. I think it's 450 to 850 or whatever. But it's a terrible just crash credit score and they're bankrupt twice or whatever. And then I'm going to put them near my finances. That could potentially be a problem. Am I worried about them stealing from me? Not necessarily. And it's kind of tough to explain this. You'd understand it more if you did our program. But basically, if you look at money, money comes in and money goes out. If someone has an issue with how they're handling their money going out, they're going to have trouble collecting money. Trust me on that one. So if I have somebody who's just a wreck financially and can't pay their own bills and don't pay their own bills, why would I put them in charge of paying my bills? I've seen people do this and it always turns out poorly. So I want to at least see that the person has a track record of responsibility. Now, again, am I going to condemn them based on what I find? I'm not condemning anybody. It's more of a hiring decision, right? But let's say I have somebody, I'm going to put them in charge of paying my bills, and I find out that 6 years ago they went bankrupt because they were involved in a bad real estate deal. But since then, their payment record has been pristine. That's probably not going to be a deal breaker for me because the person has showed a record of responsibility and it was a one-time unusual anomaly that happens. Sometimes people end up in bad deals, especially during market crashes. But if it's a pattern of problems, that is an issue for me. All right. And the one thing I forgot to mention too, and actually I didn't forget to mention it, I mentioned I was going to go through it. This might be something you do before you do all these background checks as part of your interview process. If they're going to be handling finance, I would also have them do some form of a simple math test with your basic, arithmetic type questions, division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. The reason I say this is if they don't know basic math, you go, well, why are we doing this? We have a calculator and we have spreadsheets. If they don't know basic math, it's going to eventually surface at some point, okay? Person has to know how to do basic math, especially if they're going to be dealing with like bookkeeping or financial records. Treatment coordinator, I'd want to see it too, in a sense. Otherwise, I'm going to get treatment plans that are sold for too much or too little. I've seen this happen before. So I want to see a basic knowledge of math. I've told this story before. I don't know if I told it on the podcast, but my wife was at Hobby Lobby, and she's in line behind this one other person. I don't know what they were buying. I wasn't in there. And the other person, I guess their bill was, what was it? It was like $7.25 or $8.25. So the person was going to make their change, the cashier, and the person goes, "Oh no, well, let me give you, $2.75, and then you could just give me a 10 back." And the cashier just completely froze up, and then both of them couldn't understand what was going on. My wife actually walked up, took a piece of paper out, and did the math for them, so she could give her the proper change. So you don't want that on your financial lines. You want someone who knows basic math. Same thing if you have somebody who's going to be writing a lot of letters or dealing with writing articles for you or posts or blog posts, things like this, or even if they're sending letters to referring docs. You want to have you want to make sure the grammar is adequate. As far as formats go, if I have somebody who doesn't know the format a business letter should be in, I could teach that to them in about a half an hour. People used to learn that in third grade, right? But if their grammar is just terrible, they don't use the right words, their spelling is terrible, that's going to be a problem, and then I'm correcting everything. And this is where people get into this frame of mind that, well, this is the best I can find. Please don't do that, folks. Don't settle. Find the right person. What you're asking for is not out of the question here or ridiculous. You're asking for basic skills, and there's nothing wrong for asking for that. And there are people who have them. I had a client who hired a scheduler. This was years ago. Who didn't like calling people. And she was talking to Sabri about this. And Sabri said, what are you thinking? Well, she doesn't like calling people, but my financial coordinator likes calling people. So I figured the scheduler would help the financial coordinator do accounts. And Sabri was like, what's the point? Part of the job of scheduler is calling people. So, or you hire a hygienist who hates selling, hates talking to patients. It's sort of like that's part of the job. It's like a dad, I hate dealing with kids, but I like fixing things around the house. It's like, sorry, dude, you got kids. So a person has to at least, maybe they don't know how to do the job, but they at least have to have the willingness to do the job. And if you do the group interview, which I talked about at the beginning of all of this, it wasn't part of this 3-part series, but it was 4 or 5 episodes ago. If you do the group interview, this grammar point is checked for when you do the initial interview process, which helps. So assuming that the background check's fine, credit check is fine if it's needed, I would do background checks on everybody I hire. Doesn't matter who it is. And their references are decent, or at least they're not bad, well then, and they've checked all my other boxes, and this is an administrative employee rather, and if I did my math and grammar as part of the interview process, fine, I'm going to hire them, start them. I'm not going to get into, and this is, again, something you can talk to your employment attorney about. We don't do a probationary period or a trial period, and I'm not saying this to give you advice. I'm saying this so I want to inspire a discussion for you to have with your employment attorney. We don't do working interviews, and we don't do probationary periods. Reason we don't do probationary periods is, at least where we are, if you indicate somebody's probationary, what's the opposite of probationary? It's like permanent, right? I don't want to indicate that there's any additional relationship or that the relationship has changed from a basic at-will relationship between me and the employee. Okay? So we don't do that. We also don't do working interviews. And I actually think this is even more dangerous in a dental practice is because if I hire somebody in a dental practice on a quote unquote working interview, I haven't put them on the payroll because I've seen people do this. They don't want to hire somebody. They don't put them on the payroll because, oh, it's such a pain. And I'm just going to give them a check at the end of the day, right? They're like a 1099 employee. The problem is, what if it's a dental assistant and you're working on a patient who has some type of communicable illness and he or she sticks themselves with a needle after the injection with the patient? Well, obviously, you would hope for insurance to cover whatever costs are associated with that, or what if they slip and fall in an operatory and break their arm? You would hope for one of your insurances to kick in. Well, workers' comp covers employees. It doesn't cover 1099 people. So your working interview person isn't an employee. Again, not saying this is legal advice, but this is something I'm telling you. Don't operate off of it. Very clear. Talk to your employment attorney about this to find out how it works in your state. You're better off, like I said, just hire the person if you feel like they're worthy of being hired. They're a good fit. And worst case scenario is they're not, and you move on. That's just what you do. And you might go, oh, but that's terrible, Jeff. No, it's worse to keep them when it's not working out. We talked about that in episode 1. All right, so now let's say this person I'm interviewing is a dental assistant, or this person's an associate doctor or hygienist. Well, here, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to add some questions to A, test their knowledge, and B, see if they're a good fit for your practice. So with an assistant, you might ask some questions like, what did they used to assist for? What part of the procedure did they do? Because it might have just been suction and retraction, right? And test their knowledge a bit. What cements did you use for inlays at the last office you were in, right? What was the tray setup for blah? Just to kind of really test their knowledge of it, because it's not just limited to dentistry, folks. We've all had that experience where someone comes in and they say how they know everything, and then when you hire them, you go, what's going on? So, your dental assistant prospect may say, oh yeah, I made temps for this, that, or the other. I wouldn't say have them make you a temp, but you may have to teach. We've had people tell us that, and then we see the temp and it looks like, a chiclet or a big block of yuck, right? So find out their general knowledge. What did you do for this? What did you use for this? Where did you guys get this material? Because then you'll get an idea of how knowledgeable this person is. You might want to have a questionnaire that you can just ask them these things when you start talking to them. I would also get into my treatment philosophy. The office manager can do this. The office's treatment philosophy with prospective providers, especially with associate doctors and hygienists, but even with assistants, so that you can kind of get a vibe for where they're at. Usually if you've got a good treatment philosophy, look, we're into restoring a patient back to, ideal oral health and, we want to eliminate all dental disease and, all of this. Usually they're into that. But you might find occasionally somebody says, well, I think people should just do what insurance covers, in which case maybe they're not a good fit for your practice. And so then, you're getting an idea of their level of understanding when you're asking these questions. So now let's talk about associate doctors for a second. So with associate doctors, there are 4 key things that are important to know before you hire them, or at least have some inkling of before you hire them. Because what are the most important things about an associate? Number 1, biggest, most important thing with an associate is their clinical skill. There is nothing that is more important than that. Because the worst thing you could possibly do is hire somebody who's a subpar clinician and let them loose on your patient base. As a matter of fact, I've discussed this before. If you have a marketing problem, let's say your marketing is just bad, it's not working out, and then you realize you have to fix it, new patients are crashing. How soon will you see a change? When will you see a recovery? Depending on the type of marketing, anywhere from a week to 3 weeks. It's pretty quick. If you have a sales problem, if all of a sudden maybe you had a bad interaction with a patient or your treatment coordinator did, and now you guys are, backed off a little bit on talking to patients, that's fixable in a day, okay, with the proper guidance. If you have a delivery problem in your practice, meaning that the dentistry is bad, open margins on crowns, you're sending people out with high spots, and it's just they're not happy. That takes a long time to fix. The longer you perpetuate it, it's almost like this. It's directly related. If you catch it in a couple days, you can fix it pretty quick because the amount of people it's had an opportunity to affect is very limited. If you let somebody loose like that in your practice for 6, 8, 9, 10 months, that may take you years to fix, and you may not completely recover without having to almost remake your practice. I knew a doctor this happened to who had an associate, And this associate, I guess, had something to do with the way Crown's, the lab fee with redos or something like this. The associate was going to have to start paying for them. So instead of getting the redo done, the associate just slammed it in whether it fit or not, So it was subpar work, and they lost patients, and that would never come back. And they never reached them again. And so clinical skin is number one. There is nothing more important than clinical skill. Number two is their clinical philosophy. If their philosophy is somewhat similar to yours as the owner doctor, that works. If it's wildly divergent, that's not going to work. And I'm not taking a particular position on this. I'm not a dentist, but let's say you have somebody who's super holistic and somebody who's conventional. Their clinical philosophies will have points where they meet and other points they don't. They'll have completely different treatment philosophies. They use completely different materials. So clinical philosophy, being in agreement, is very important. Number three is their speed. And I don't mean are they doing it so speedy that they're doing you know what I mean by this. Are they moving at an adequate speed in order to support themselves? I remember hearing one of our clients, when she first got out of dental school, she tried working in an office and she said, I'm too slow to make money at this. So she joined the military and was like a military dentist for 4 years. She wasn't bad clinically. She was just too slow, and they don't care. They're not on production quotas. So she got faster. So clinical speed. The fourth thing is their chairside manner and communication skills. Are they a personable individual? Now, the funny thing about it is that's trainable, unless they absolutely hate people and are just, somebody who can't get along with anyone. Well, the interview probably won't go well anyway. So the problem you face with an associate, unless this is somebody that you know and have worked with before, is you have no working experience with this person. And this is, again, this isn't to make less of the other positions in a dental practice. The most important position in a dental practice is the dentist. That's the one thing a dental practice cannot survive without. So you're now bringing in another dentist. So you have to make sure that they are up to or can be brought up to the level, or the expectations for this practice, right? So how would we check a few of these things? Well, one thing you might want to do during the interview process is take a few of your charts, a few of your treatment plans, give them some scans and some pictures and whatnot, and the charting, and have them, don't show them the treatment plan that you gave this patient, have them treatment plan this case. So, here's the pre-treatment, here's all the data, enough diagnostics to where you could make a treatment plan, and have them look at it and tell you how they treatment plan the case. See if it's in alignment with your treatment plan. If it's, you treatment plan 4 crowns, 3 fillings, and an implant, 4 or 3, I got to remember what I just said, and they come back with 4 crowns, 2 fillings, and an implant, well, you're pretty close. Maybe they missed that one occlusal composite that you did, That's what you want to see. You want to see, are you guys somewhat in agreement? If they come back with 4, amalgam or 7 amalgams and, a partial, you probably don't agree. And it's probably not going to be a good fit. For clinical skill, again, you're not going to know that 100% till you work with them. You could look at pictures of cases they've done, any models where they may have models with some of their preps or something like this. And then for speed, that's pretty simple. Check their production. And you want to, when you do that, you want to look at, okay, so how much were you producing per day? I was averaging 5,000 a day. Explain your average day to me. So you can get an idea of how fast they're moving, at what fee, so you can kind of extrapolate that to your practice, all right? But ultimately, you are not going to know how skilled of a clinician they are until you work together. So this is going to require personal observation, and I would advise, if you bring in an associate doctor, that you watch them like a cat at a mouse hole. You're just watching them like a hawk until you are comfortable. And I would sort of start with the watching and back it off over time. But I would never completely 100% let go on that quality, even if you were no longer chairside. Say you weren't even doing sales chairside, you've got your practice so well organized that you come in once a week for a staff meeting or something, which we have clients that do that. Well, those clients also root through the lab and see what the cases look like, and they see what's happening with their patients to make sure that the clinical care is staying at the correct level of quality. Same thing if you had a second location. You want to do random clinical checks. You have to perform clinical oversight. So how would you do that with a new person? Well, initially, when you bring them in, you might have them assist you for a few procedures or assist them for a few procedures. Okay? You want to look at their work as they're working on patients in a good, not in a way that sort of chops them off at the knees, but in a way that allows you to catch anything that goes wrong. So let's say, you treatment plan a case, or the associate did, and they're seeing the patient. Obviously, the patient knows it's your practice, so you're the owner doctor. So you might walk in at the end of that procedure and just, hey, Dr. So-and-so, hey, great to see you again. Wow, look at that. Let me see. Wow, isn't he a great doctor? Just look it over. You could do it in a way where it doesn't make the associate look bad, okay? But I would look at the associate's work, and I wouldn't just rely on models and scans. I would want to see it physically in the patient's mouth, and you can do it in a way where it's just sort of like you were coming by to say hi. Hey, I just wanted to get over and see. I saw you met Dr. Smith. Hey, well, let me have a look. Wow, Dr. Smith is good. We made a good call on this. Dr. Smith, aren't you? You see what I'm saying? Do it in a way where it makes the associate look good. Now, if the associate has a huge problem with you doing this, or they don't want to do anything to have you perform clinical oversight, it's probably a terrible fit, because ultimately you're on the line for this. That associate can go get another job. You cannot. You own the practice. All right. So that's the whole rundown of stuff between the last 3 episodes that I would go over. So how do we put this together into a basic, cohesive interview process? Okay, and we've covered a lot of this, and there's even more. We go over a ton of this on the MGE Power Program. It's my, shameless plug. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. But here, let's end this off with a summary of how this would go. All right, so I'm going to be interviewing somebody. So what am I going to look at prior to actually meeting with them? I'm going to review their resume, and I'm going to review their application, okay? And I'm going to see initially if there are any red flags or issue. They're looking for only part-time work. I need a full-time employee, and this is a deal breaker. They're applying for the hygiene position but are not a licensed hygienist. You've seen that before, right? And then I might look at, on a notepad, make a list of a couple questions I might want to ask them about based upon what I've seen. I don't want to walk in cold, be handed a resume and an application and read it in front of the person. I want to do it before I actually sit down with them. Then I'm going to bring them back, and I'm going to have a distraction-free interview. Some people will tour the prospective employee around the practice, and you can if this looks like it's not going to be a long interview. If like, for instance, it shows they're only looking for part-time and I need somebody full-time, or they can't work Mondays, I might not want to do that, because why would I want to waste more time? Of course, I'm going to be gracious and have excellent manners while I'm doing all of this. But again, I don't want to waste my time or theirs. But up to you. If you want to tour them around a little bit, then bring them back to your office. In any event, whatever office you're interviewing them should be controlled, distraction-free. You're not being interrupted consistently. Now, one of the first things I'm going to want to determine, whether it's I've woven this into my interview questions or it's part of just some innocuous questions I'm going to ask, is I'm going to want to determine their emotional tone level. I talked about how to do this in episode 1. I'm going to want to get a good beat on this quickly. I'm also going to observe the person I'm interviewing. So they came in for a job interview and they're dressed in a tank top and a pair of cutoff shorts and flip-flops, and they're sweaty and their hair's unkempt. That might be a problem. Do you see? How is this person presenting themselves? Because again, if someone really wants to get a job, they're going to try to put their best foot forward, right? So if they're presenting themselves in an unprofessional way, that is going to be something I'm going to take a look at as part of the whole package here. So after I've gotten through the basic pleasantries, hi, how are you? Was it easy to find a parking space? Like that type of stuff. I'm going to describe the position I'm hiring for. I'm going to include the hours, the compensation, anything and everything I can think of so this person has a really good picture of what the job actually is. I may not have put all of this in the ad. I might have just put the position and the comp, but I don't have the office hours. If I'm hiring somebody, my office hours are 8 to 4 Monday through Thursday and 8 to 12 on Friday, but I expect them there a half hour before and a half hour after every day. This is when I'm going to say that. I'm not going to put that in an ad, okay? And when the benefits kick in, and what kind of benefits are they, and how many vacation days do they get, all this stuff I'm just pouring right out as I start out. And if you listen to the group interview episode 4 or 5 episodes ago, you know why I'm doing this. If you didn't, it's real simple. If I lay all this out and this person has a problem where it's a deal breaker with any of the circumstances, this job pays between 20 and 25 an hour based on experience. And they go, oh, well, I need 45 an hour. Well, I'm not going to pay 45 an hour. I'm going to end the interview nicely. Yeah, I'm sorry, we can't move off that amount. That's pretty much what this position pays. Well, thank you for coming. Because why waste their time and mine? They need to go find a job, and I got plenty to do. I'm not the full-time HR executive at the dental practice. Even if I was, why would I want to waste my time on this? There's other stuff I should be doing, like finding another applicant. So I'm going to describe the position in detail right off the bat, make sure they understand all the points. And then after I've done that, I'm going to ask them, okay, good. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about any of that? Does that sound like something that you'd be interested in? And if they go, yeah, this sounds really good, now I'm going to continue. So there, I might get into the simple questions I'd ask about their previous jobs. So when I start looking over the previous jobs, if you remember, I'm verifying production, right? I'm looking at, can this person produce? Do they have a record of production? And I explained how to do this in episode 2. I'm also going to get into what are their goals work-wise. Maybe at the beginning of this, if they've been agreeable, I've described the culture of the office a little bit and what our mission is. And then I'm going over each position. And then at some point, I'm going to ask them what their goals are work-wise because I want to know, what's their plan? Well, I need a job for a year. A year from now, I'm moving overseas. Well, that may or may not be a deal breaker for me. You see, if they're moving in 6 months, it probably is. I'd rather find somebody who can work here for a while. Look, they don't know me and I don't know them, so I don't need them to tell me I want to work here for the rest of my life. That isn't the point. But I do want to know where their head's at work-wise. If it's like, well, I'm looking for something because I'm trying to start my own business and I want to be in business for myself by 6 months from now. Well, then, okay, maybe not going to work. I want someone who's got their attention focused here on what we're doing. Now, if they're in school part-time to go become, something, a paralegal, talked about this a couple weeks ago, fine, and I'd ask when do you get your degree or certification? Oh, well, 2 years from now. Okay. Well, then you got them for 2 years. And who knows, by then they might be making more, depending on the position you're hiring for, than a paralegal makes. And they may go, heck with it, I'm just going to stay here. There are plenty of people who don't do what in life, they don't have the profession that is associated with their degree. Maybe they're in hygiene school. In which case, great, that's a future hygienist possibly. This is where I'm going to want to find these things out, as well as verifying production at each position that they have been in before based on what I discussed last week. I'm going to keep an eye out for red flags. One of the things I may have noted when I looked at their resume is that they haven't held a job for longer than 3 months. And I discussed this a bit in last week's episode. Job bouncing is more prevalent now since 2020 than it was in years prior. I saw an application not long ago where the person listed a job they had for 2 weeks. I would have just left that blank. I was looking for a job because that just looks bad. If it's a continuous history of 3 months for the last few years, that's probably an issue for me. But you are going to see more of it than you used to. Okay. And also I'm going to check out if the person is harshly critical of past employers, that again is a little bit of a red flag for me. So assuming I've done all that, they can produce, they fit the qualifications that I'm looking for in this position, they can work the hours, they have whatever licenses I need, etc. If they're a technical employee, assistant, doctor, hygienist, I'm going to ask additional questions to sort of consult their understanding, especially with an associate doctor like I just talked about. And assuming all of that looks good, now I'm going to check references. And then as applicable, up to you guys, I would do a background check. This is when I have them sign the paperwork for it. If they're going to be handling finances, I'd also do the credit check at the same time. If math or grammar was any part of this, I would give them something to fill out either before I sat down with them or after I finished talking to them. Okay? Might be easier before because, especially you can have them do it while they're waiting. Again, this is something I discuss with your employment attorney. But assuming that's allowed wherever you practice, you can have them do that before you sit down, because if you sit down and, they bomb out on the math test and you explain the job and they go, I don't want to do this job, this doesn't sound like a job for me, then you didn't waste time having them do it after, which I wouldn't do at that point. I would only really get into that with somebody, either have it done before you sit down with them. The grammar could be a paragraph about why they feel they would be the best fit for this job. Write a paragraph on blah, 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 or 2 paragraphs on why you feel you'd be the best fit for this job. And again, I don't care what they write, unless it's really weird. But I want to see if they can spell and construct a sentence, right? You can check with your attorney. You might do that before the interview, after the interview, up to you. then assuming it's a good deal, I'm going to offer them position. Now, I would recommend talk to your employment attorney about creating some type of an offer letter that you can give them with a start date on it that they can sign. We do that with employees. We recommend our clients do the same because there's no he said, she said at that point. It's I thought the benefits were supposed to start after 60 days. It's like, no, on your offer letter it says very clearly they start after 180 days. You want this stuff in writing, especially the key bullet points of the position. We're paying you for this much. We're hiring you for this much. So it's very clear what they're agreeing to and the fact that it's an at-will agreement if you're in an at-will state. And assuming it's good, you have their start date, you got an employee. And when they come in, you have to have some onboarding and training stuff to get them up and running and productive as quickly as possible, which I'm going to be covering in future episodes. Anyway, all right, well, that wasn't quite as long as episode 1. It was longer than episode 2, and we definitely broke that half-hour barrier again. Saw a comment somewhere that, the 30 minutes or less, and of course proceeds to immediately exceed that in the first episode. Sorry about that. I may take that part out of it in our little slogan. Anyway, folks, I do hope this helps. I'll put the links to the MGE Power Program and DDS Success on the episode webpage. If you have any questions, you can email me directly at jeffb@mgeonline.com. I'll put that link as well on the episode webpage. And to find out more about MGE, don't forget to go to mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. And as an aside, if you like this podcast and you have friends in the industry you'd like to listen to it, please take a moment to share it, leave a review. That stuff helps as far as moving us up in the algorithm. If you like the podcast, if you don't like it, you don't have to do this. To get more people using this data to improve their offices. Anyway, folks, that's all I have for you this week. Have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.